The galaxy was filled with countless worlds, each one more hostile than the last. Some were full of deadly creatures, others with toxic atmospheres or violent storms. But among them, there was a race of beings unlike any other. They were known as the Deathworld Conquerors. For centuries, these beings had traveled across the stars, overcoming world after world, each more dangerous than the last. They had faced creatures that could tear through steel, planets with skies that burned the flesh, and storms that could rip apart mountains. Yet, time and time again, they had emerged victorious. They were known as the greatest warriors in the galaxy, the ones who could survive anything. Their bodies were a perfect blend of muscle and resilience. Their senses were sharper than any humans could ever be, able to detect the slightest movement in the air or feel the tiniest shift in the ground beneath their feet. Their technology was advanced beyond belief. Ships that could travel through space in mere moments, weapons that could slice through armor like it was paper. No one, no thing, could stand in their way. But now, they had come to a new world, Earth. At first, they didn't think much of it. They had heard stories about this planet, stories that whispered of a species of small, fragile beings who had managed to build cities, create weapons, and survive despite being so weak compared to the rest of the galaxy. Humans. The conquerors thought they were just like all the others. They believed that Earth would be easy to take over. After all, they had conquered worlds far more dangerous. What could this tiny, insignificant planet possibly have to offer? Their massive warship entered Earth's atmosphere with a thunderous roar. The humans looked up in awe, but they had no idea what was about to hit them. The Deathworlders knew this was nothing more than a quick mission. They would land, overpower the weak humans, and claim Earth as their own. It was supposed to be an easy victory. The first signs of trouble came when they set foot on Earth. The air here was different, strange, almost. It wasn't toxic or hostile, but there was something about it that felt off. The atmosphere was thick with life, a kind of energy the conquerors had never experienced before. In an instant, they realized this planet was not as simple as they had imagined. But they pushed those thoughts aside. They had faced worse. This was Earth, a primitive world, with primitive beings. Their first encounter with humanity was quick. They found a small human village, simple and unguarded. The Deathworlders expected an easy fight, but what they saw surprised them. The humans were weak, yes. Their bodies were fragile compared to the Deathworlders, and their technology was nothing compared to the advanced weapons the conquerors carried. But there was something in the humans' eyes, something fierce, something determined. The Deathworlders attacked. They expected the humans to flee in fear, as all the other creatures had done. Instead, the humans fought back. They didn't run. They didn't hide. They stood their ground, using every tool, every weapon, and every scrap of knowledge they had to defend their home. The Deathworlders were caught off guard. The humans weren't strong, but they were clever. They used the environment to their advantage, luring the invaders into traps they hadn't anticipated. Simple weapons, rocks, sticks, and makeshift guns seemed to work. The conquerors' superior strength and advanced technology couldn't prevent their enemy from fighting back with everything they had. It was clear now, Earth was not like the other planets. The humans didn't fear death. They didn't fear the Deathworlders. And that was something the conquerors didn't know how to handle. In their past conquests, they had always crushed their enemies without hesitation. But here, on Earth, something was different. The humans weren't just defending their planet. They were fighting for their survival, and that made them unpredictable. The battle raged on for hours, but it wasn't the humans' weapons or their numbers that impressed the Deathworlders the most. It was their spirit. Every time they thought the humans were defeated, they would rise again, more determined than ever. The Deathworlders grew frustrated. How could these fragile creatures be so strong? How could they fight back when they should have been crushed by the sheer force of the conqueror's might? It wasn't just the humans' physical strength that was baffling. It was their creativity. They didn't fight like any other species the Deathworlders had encountered. Instead of running headfirst into battle, the humans used the world around them, turning the environment into their weapon. They made use of Earth's forests, rivers, and mountains, setting traps, using the terrain to outsmart the Deathworlders at every turn. At one point, the Conquerors found themselves trapped in a maze of trees, their advanced sensors failing to pinpoint their human opponents. A simple tree branch tied to a rope triggered a massive net, sending several of the Deathworlders crashing to the ground. The humans had set the trap with such precision, it almost felt like Earth itself had become their ally. For the first time, the Deathworlders began to feel doubt. This was not the world they thought it was. The humans weren't just weak, helpless creatures. They were survivors. They were warriors in their own right. As the day wore on, the Deathworlders realized something. Earth was not going to be conquered easily. They had underestimated the humans, thinking them nothing more than a primitive species with no chance against an advanced civilization. But now, they understood. Humanity was not something to be taken lightly. The Conquerors were used to being the hunters, not the hunted. Yet on Earth, for the first time, they found themselves on the defensive. The planet's strange environment, combined with humanity's relentless fight for survival, made them feel like they were being swallowed whole by the very world they had come to conquer. As night fell, the Deathworlders retreated back to their ship, regrouping and reassessing their approach. They hadn't expected this. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were learning the hard way. But something gnawed at them. There was a strange, unsettling feeling in the air, a sense of danger lurking in the shadows. It wasn't just the humans they had to worry about. The planet itself seemed to be alive, watching, waiting. The Conquerors had survived every Deathworld they had ever encountered. But Earth was different. Earth was a test, one they had never been prepared for. And they had only just begun to realize. Earth had just begun to fight back. The Deathworlders had never been truly challenged before. They had destroyed countless worlds, obliterated entire species, and left devastation in their wake. But Earth was something different. After the first encounter with the humans, they were still confident. They had retreated to regroup, but in their minds, this was just another battle. They would learn the humans' weaknesses, adapt, and then crush them. It was only a matter of time, or so they thought. The next day, they made their move again. The Deathworlders landed in a different region of the planet, one that seemed less populated, hoping to find a more isolated place to strike. The land was vast, full of dense forests and rolling hills. It felt almost peaceful, too peaceful, as if nothing could possibly go wrong. But as soon as they began their march, the same unsettling feeling crept over them. The air here was heavy with life, thick with trees that seemed to loom over them like silent, watching sentinels. The humans, as expected, didn't wait to be attacked. They fought immediately, but this time, it wasn't with simple traps or small weapons. No, the humans had something more. They had begun organizing, coordinating their attacks across larger areas. The Deathworlders noticed that humans were now working together in ways they hadn't before. Small groups of them would disappear into the forest, only to reappear in unexpected places, creating confusion among the invaders. The Deathworlders quickly realized they were walking into another trap, one they hadn't seen coming. As they ventured deeper into the forest, things started to go wrong. The ground beneath their feet became unstable, as if the very soil itself was trying to swallow them whole. They stepped into what looked like a simple patch of grass, only to trigger a hidden pit that opened beneath them, sending several of them tumbling into a dark, deep hole. The Deathworlders had no idea how the humans had created these traps so quickly, but they weren't just using the landscape for defense. They were turning the entire environment against them. Every step they took seemed to lead them into another ambush, another deadly surprise. But it wasn't just the landscape that was causing trouble. The humans themselves were far more resourceful than the Deathworlders had anticipated. In a clearing, A small group of them appeared, seemingly unarmed, with nothing but a few pieces of scrap metal. The Deathworlders laughed, thinking this would be easy. They were clearly untrained and helpless. But as the conquerors approached, the humans sprang into action. The scrap metal wasn't just junk. It was part of a sophisticated trap, a makeshift weapon that exploded in a burst of blinding light and sound, temporarily disorienting the invaders. The Deathworlders were caught off guard. These humans had no real technology, no weapons that could match the Deathworlders' advanced armory, but somehow they were fighting back with sheer ingenuity. It became clear these people had nothing to lose, and they were willing to sacrifice anything to protect their world. The Deathworlders had expected a simple war, a one-sided fight that they could win in a matter of hours. But the humans were playing a different game, one where the rules were constantly changing, where every corner held a new danger, and every step forward was met with resistance. As the day wore on, the Deathworlders were forced to retreat once again, this time with fewer soldiers. They had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but now they were facing an enemy they couldn't predict, couldn't understand. The humans were not just defending their land. They were adapting to the invaders, learning from each encounter and finding new ways to strike back. And with each defeat, the Deathworlders began to realize something they hadn't considered before. Earth wasn't just a weak, unimportant planet. It was alive, in a way that none of the Deathworlders' previous conquests had been. The planet itself seemed to be fighting back too. There were moments when the Deathworlders felt as if the very Earth itself was conspiring against them. The weather would shift without warning. Violent storms, strong winds, and rains that washed away entire camps. Even the animals, once thought harmless, were becoming hostile. Creatures they hadn't seen before appeared from the underbrush, attacking the invaders with startling speed and strength. The Deathworlders began to realize they weren't just up against humans anymore. They were facing a world that didn't want them here, a world that would fight to the last breath to defend itself. The more they fought, the more they understood. Earth was not like any other world they had encountered. It wasn't just the humans they had to fear, it was everything. And as the Deathworlders took a brief moment to assess the situation, one thing became painfully clear. Earth had only just begun to fight back. This was not going to be an easy conquest. The Deathworlders were about to learn that in the battle for survival, humans were not the only thing they had to worry about. The Deathworlders had always relied on their strength, their advanced technology, and their sheer brutality to overcome any obstacle. But on Earth, they were beginning to realize that raw power alone wasn't enough. The humans, though physically weaker, had something else, something the Deathworlders had never encountered before. It wasn't just their adaptability, it was their resourcefulness. As the invaders continued their assault, they couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were always one step ahead. Every time the Deathworlders thought they had the upper hand, the humans used the environment to create an unexpected counterattack. But it wasn't just the landscape or makeshift traps anymore. The humans had begun to use something even more dangerous: their minds. In the days that followed, the Deathworlders observed the humans closely. They had underestimated them at first, believing their advanced technology and superior physical abilities would make the battle an easy victory. But Earth's humans were clever in ways that the conquerors had never considered. They didn't just use their weapons, they used everything around them: the land, the weather, and even their emotions. These were not the mindless, frightened creatures the Deathworlders had expected. They were warriors, yes, but they were survivors first and foremost. It began to show in the human strategies. Instead of charging head-on into battle, they started to retreat, luring the Deathworlders into dense forests or vast, open plains where the invaders' ships and weapons couldn't be as effective. The Deathworlders, confident in their superior technology, had never expected the humans to lead them into traps so cleverly designed. They began to fall into ambushes more often than they liked. One particular ambush took place in a small, seemingly unimportant town. The Deathworlders had expected an easy victory, an isolated area where they could capture the humans and continue their invasion. But the humans had other plans. As the conquerors entered the town, they found the streets abandoned, eerily quiet. The buildings were old, decaying, and made of wood. Nothing like the metal cities the Deathworlders had encountered on other planets. They expected the humans to fight in an organized fashion, perhaps in small groups. But what they didn't know was that the humans had created a network, a hidden army spread across the land, watching their every move. Suddenly, without warning, the streets exploded with activity. Buildings collapsed, and thick clouds of smoke filled the air. A hidden underground network had activated, sending sharp metallic spikes into the streets, trapping the invaders in place. Even the simple buildings were weapons. Every structure had been rigged, and as the Deathworlders tried to move, they found themselves trapped in a web of their own making. It was here that the Deathworlders encountered a level of human creativity they hadn't expected. The traps weren't just deadly. They were carefully designed to disorient, confuse, and exhaust them. The humans didn't need advanced technology to defeat their enemies. They needed only their imagination. The invaders began to lose their confidence. The Deathworlders had never faced such resistance before. They were used to overpowering their foes with superior technology and overwhelming force, but Earth had no such thing. The humans had invented their own weapons, not with guns or machines, but with their own minds. As the battle continued, the Deathworlders began to question their own methods. They had advanced technology that allowed them to wipe out entire civilizations with a single strike. But here on Earth, they were being outsmarted, outwitted by beings who had no concept of the power they were up against. The more the Deathworlders fought, the more they began to understand the power of human will. The humans didn't have the kind of firepower the Deathworlders were used to facing. They couldn't blow up planets with a single bomb or slice through metal with a laser. Instead, they relied on what made them unique: their ability to work together, to learn from each failure, to adapt quickly, and to never give up. Even when the Deathworlders thought they had the upper hand, the humans were already planning their next move. After each skirmish, the humans would vanish into the wilderness, disappearing into the vast forests or hidden cities underground. And each time they returned, they were better prepared. They were learning faster than the Deathworlders could keep up with. The invaders had come to Earth expecting a quick and easy victory, but now they found themselves facing an enemy who was not only resilient, but constantly evolving. The Deathworlders' confidence began to wane as the humans' tactics became more sophisticated. It wasn't just about fighting, it was about surviving. The humans weren't interested in just winning battles, they were fighting for their very existence. And that, the Deathworlders began to realize, made them a far more dangerous opponent than they had ever anticipated. But it wasn't just the humans' cleverness that was unsettling, it was their resourcefulness in the face of overwhelming odds. They didn't just rely on their surroundings or their weapons, they relied on each other. Humans were a collective force, able to overcome their own weaknesses by coming together and using each other's strengths. It was a force of will, of unity, that the Deathworlders didn't understand, and it was starting to feel like something they couldn't defeat. As the days turned into weeks, the Deathworlders began to feel the pressure mounting. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. The Deathworlders had faced far stronger species in their past conquests, but none had ever fought so relentlessly, and none had ever been so resourceful. They began to feel the sting of their own underestimation. Earth wasn't like the other planets they had conquered. It wasn't just the humans who posed a threat. It was everything. The Deathworlders were facing something they had never encountered before, a species that, despite being far weaker than their conquerors, had something far more dangerous: the will to survive at any cost. And with that realization came a single terrifying thought. This was not going to be an easy victory. In fact, it might just be their first defeat. Suddenly, without warning, the streets exploded with activity. Buildings collapsed, and thick clouds of smoke filled the air. A hidden underground network had activated, sending sharp metallic spikes into the streets, trapping the invaders in place. Even the simple buildings were weapons. Every structure had been rigged, and as the Deathworlders tried to move, they found themselves trapped in a web of their own making. It was here that the Deathworlders encountered a level of human creativity they hadn't expected. The traps weren't just deadly. They were carefully designed to disorient, confuse, and exhaust them. The humans didn't need advanced technology to defeat their enemies. They needed only their imagination. The invaders began to lose their confidence. The Deathworlders had never faced such resistance before. They were used to overpowering their foes with superior technology and overwhelming force, but Earth had no such thing. The humans had invented their own weapons, not with guns or machines, but with their own minds. As the battle continued, the Deathworlders began to question their own methods. They had advanced technology that allowed them to wipe out entire civilizations with a single strike. But here on Earth, they were being outsmarted, outwitted by beings who had no concept of the power they were up against. The more the Deathworlders fought, the more they began to understand the power of human will. The humans didn't have the kind of firepower the Deathworlders were used to facing. They couldn't blow up planets with a single bomb or slice through metal with a laser. Instead, they relied on what made them unique: their ability to work together, to learn from each failure, to adapt quickly, and to never give up. Even when the Deathworlders thought they had the upper hand, the humans were already planning their next move. After each skirmish, the humans would vanish into the wilderness, disappearing into the vast forests or hidden cities underground. And each time they returned, they were better prepared. They were learning faster than the Deathworlders could keep up with. The invaders had come to Earth expecting a quick and easy victory, but now they found themselves facing an enemy who was not only resilient, but constantly evolving. The Deathworlders' confidence began to wane as the humans' tactics became more sophisticated. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about surviving. The humans weren't interested in just winning battles. They were fighting for their very existence. And that, the Deathworlders began to realize, made them a far more dangerous opponent than they had ever anticipated. But it wasn't just the humans' cleverness that was unsettling. It was their resourcefulness in the face of overwhelming odds. They didn't just rely on their surroundings or their weapons. They relied on each other. Humans were a collective force, able to overcome their own weaknesses by coming together and using each other's strengths. It was a force of will, of unity, that the Deathworlders didn't understand, and it was starting to feel like something they couldn't defeat. As the days turned into weeks, the Deathworlders began to feel the pressure mounting. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. The Deathworlders had faced far stronger species in their past conquests, but none had ever fought so relentlessly, and none had ever been so resourceful. They began to feel the sting of their own underestimation. Earth wasn't like the other planets they had conquered. It wasn't just the humans who posed a threat. It was everything. The Deathworlders were facing something they had never encountered before, a species that, despite being far weaker than their conquerors, had something far more dangerous: the will to survive at any cost. And with that realization came a single, terrifying thought. This was not going to be an easy victory. In fact, it might just be their first defeat. The Deathworlders had never been forced to confront an enemy quite like this before. Each battle, each skirmish on Earth had left them more exhausted and perplexed than the last. They had traveled across the stars, conquering worlds with ease, but Earth wasn't like the others. Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a challenge, one that was proving more difficult than they ever could have imagined. It wasn't the humans' weapons or their traps that were becoming the biggest problem. It was the environment itself. Earth seemed to be alive, reacting to the invaders in ways they had never experienced. The Deathworlders had come prepared for battle, but they hadn't accounted for the world they were fighting on. The natural forces of Earth itself seemed to be pushing back. At first, it was subtle. A rainstorm that came out of nowhere, soaking their equipment. A gust of wind strong enough to topple their smaller ships. These small inconveniences had seemed like nothing at first, but as the days passed, the planet's mood grew darker. The Deathworlders began to realize they were not only fighting the humans, they were fighting Earth itself. One evening, they set up camp in a dense forest, thinking it would be a safe place to rest. The forest was quiet, eerily so. The kind of silence that makes you feel as though something is watching you from the shadows. The Deathworlders had experienced harsh environments before, planets with unpredictable weather patterns, toxic skies, and violent creatures. But they had never felt this unease. It was as if the very land was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. They settled in for the night, but it wasn't long before the ground beneath them began to tremble. At first, it was a faint rumble, something they thought might just be an aftershock from the previous battle. But then it grew stronger, more intense. The ground began to crack, and trees were uprooted by the violent shaking. The Deathworlders scrambled to gather their weapons, but it was too late. The Earth itself was fighting back. They had walked right into the path of a massive earthquake. The tremors were relentless, tearing through the forest and shaking the Deathworlders' camp apart. Their equipment was scattered, and their vehicles were tossed like toys, leaving them stranded in the middle of the chaos. The sky, which had been clear just moments before, was now covered in dark, swirling clouds. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain began to pour down in sheets, turning the forest floor into a swamp. The Deathworlders' advanced technology wasn't designed to withstand such natural disasters. They had fought entire civilizations before, but they had never fought a planet. In the midst of the storm, the humans appeared, as if from nowhere. They weren't just survivors. They were prepared. Somehow, despite the earthquake and the violent weather, the humans had found shelter. They appeared from the shadows of the trees, leading the Deathworlders into a network of caves. The humans were resourceful. They knew how to survive in this environment, and they knew how to use it to their advantage. The Deathworlders, disoriented by the earthquake, stumbled into the caves, their minds reeling. They were the conquerors, the strongest beings in the galaxy, but here, on Earth, they felt like children. The humans, whose bodies were far weaker and less durable, moved with ease through the caves, finding paths through the dark that the Deathworlders couldn't see. They knew this planet. They understood it. The conquerors were the invaders, but it was the humans who had the upper hand. The deeper they went into the caves, the more they began to understand just how connected everything on Earth was. It wasn't just the weather that was against them. It was the entire ecosystem. Every plant, every animal, every rock on this planet seemed to be part of a larger network, one that was working together to repel the invaders. The Deathworlders began to feel like they were the intruders in someone else's world, and the world was fighting back. But the humans weren't the only ones who had adapted to the harsh environment. Earth was home to creatures unlike any the Deathworlders had encountered before. The planet's wildlife was aggressive, unpredictable, and relentless. As the Deathworlders made their way through the caves, they encountered large predatory animals, some the size of small buildings, that stalked them through the tunnels. These creatures were not afraid of the invaders. They didn't flee in fear like the creatures on other worlds. Instead, they attacked, using their natural instincts to track and kill. The Deathworlders fought back, but their advanced weapons were no match for the sheer power of Earth's beasts. One of the largest creatures, a massive four-legged predator with claws the size of swords, attacked a small group of Deathworlders. They tried to fight back, but the beast was relentless, slashing through their armor and tearing through their ranks. It wasn't just the creature's physical strength that made it dangerous. It was its ability to adapt. Every time they thought they had it cornered, it would disappear into the shadows, only to strike again from a different angle. The Deathworlders, who had once been untouchable, were now forced to retreat. They had thought they were the apex predators, but Earth's creatures were proving that they were not the top of the food chain. The Deathworlders had underestimated the power of Earth's wildlife, and now they were paying the price. As they retreated further into the caves, they realized just how outmatched they were. The planet was not just fighting back through its creatures. It was fighting back through everything. The weather, the animals, the very ground beneath their feet. It was all working together, forcing the Deathworlders into a corner. Earth was alive, in a way no other planet had ever been, and it was proving to be the most dangerous force they had ever encountered. In the distance, they heard the sounds of human voices. The humans had once again proven their ability to survive, even in the harshest conditions. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The Deathworlders, who had come to conquer, now found themselves on the brink of defeat, trapped in a cave, surrounded by creatures they could not control, and hunted by a planet that seemed to want them gone. The question was no longer if they would conquer Earth, but if they would even survive. The Deathworlders had never felt so out of their depth. Every plan they had made, every strategy they had developed, had crumbled in the face of Earth's relentless resistance. The planet itself was a living, breathing force, and it was no longer just the humans who were fighting back. The more the Deathworlders pushed, the more they were forced to retreat. Earth was becoming an enemy they could not defeat, not through sheer power, nor by brute force. And now, they were beginning to understand just how deep the planet's defenses ran. It wasn't just the creatures of Earth or the natural disasters that had them on edge. It was the humans themselves. They had come to see Earth's inhabitants not as weak, fragile beings, but as something far more dangerous. A species capable of adapting to any challenge. The humans weren't just surviving. They were learning. Each battle, each confrontation seemed to make them stronger, more organized, and more effective in their resistance. The Deathworlders had assumed they would crush Earth's inhabitants in a matter of days, if not hours. They had come with the belief that humanity, with all its primitive tools and weapons, would collapse under the weight of an invading force. But instead, the humans had turned the tide. They had become the hunters, not the hunted. And the Deathworlders found themselves becoming the prey. The first sign of this shift came when the Deathworlders encountered a new, unexpected weapon, something they had never seen before. The humans had created a unified resistance, one that wasn't just about guerrilla tactics or ambushes anymore. The humans had taken their war to the sky. The Deathworlders, who were used to traveling through space and deploying advanced technology with ease, suddenly found themselves under attack by human-made fighter jets, primitive compared to their own ships, but fast and highly maneuverable. The humans had begun to develop weapons and strategies that the Deathworlders had never anticipated. These weren't the weapons of a weak species. These were the weapons of a species that refused to give up. The Deathworlders' ships, once the most advanced in the galaxy, were now being outmaneuvered and outgunned by humans who had once been so technologically backward. The fighter jets darted in and out of the conqueror's ship's firing range, launching missiles and laser beams that hit with surprising accuracy. It wasn't just the human pilots that amazed the Deathworlders. It was the coordination between them. Every jet seemed to know exactly where the others would be, each one working in tandem to strike at the heart of the Deathworlders' forces. It became clear the humans had not only learned how to survive, they had learned how to fight back in ways the Deathworlders had never considered. The conquerors had underestimated them, thinking they would simply fall in line, waiting to be conquered. But now, the Deathworlders were facing a problem they had never encountered before, a species that could rise from nothing and become something far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. In one particularly harrowing battle, a large Deathworlder ship, a command vessel that had been the pride of their fleet, was struck by a human missile that pierced its hull. The blast was so powerful that it sent shockwaves through the surrounding area, sending debris flying. The Deathworlders' command center was suddenly thrown into chaos. Panic spread as their once-thought unbeatable ship began to fall, flames licking the sky. It was at that moment the Deathworlders realized something fundamental about their situation. They were no longer the apex predators. Earth had become a place where the most dangerous thing wasn't their advanced technology, their weapons, or their strength. It was the humans' unyielding will to survive. As the battle raged on, the Deathworlders found themselves slowly losing ground. Their ships, once superior, were being systematically destroyed. The humans' fighter jets, though primitive compared to the Deathworlders' technology, were relentless. They didn't have the advanced shields or firepower of the conquerors, but they had something far more dangerous: a refusal to surrender. Every jet, every missile, every attack felt like the humans were driving home a single point. Earth was theirs to protect, and they would not allow it to fall. For the first time, the Deathworlders found themselves outmatched, not by technology, not by strength, but by resolve. The humans were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting for their home, for their future, and that gave them a power the Deathworlders couldn't understand. They had faced endless enemies across the galaxy, and none of them had ever fought with such raw determination. But the Deathworlders weren't going to give up easily. Their pride, their arrogance, and their hunger for domination burned brighter than ever. They would not let a primitive species defeat them. As the battle continued, the conquerors tried to adapt. They regrouped, recalculated their strategies, and began attacking the humans with renewed fury. But they were facing a shifting battlefield now, one that was no longer simply a war of weapons, but a battle of willpower. The Deathworlders realized something they had never considered before. This wasn't just a fight for land or resources. This was a fight for the soul of the planet itself. The humans were no longer simply trying to protect their cities or their families. They were fighting for everything: their planet, their legacy, their very existence. And in that fight, the Deathworlders were outclassed. As the humans continued to rise, the Deathworlders were left with a brutal truth. They had underestimated their opponent, and now they were paying the price. Earth was no longer a Deathworld to be conquered. It was a place where the last stand was being fought, and the humans, against all odds, were winning. The question now was no longer if the Deathworlders could conquer Earth. It was whether they could even survive the storm they had unleashed. And with that realization, the Deathworlders had only one option left: retreat, or face complete annihilation at the hands of an enemy they never saw coming. The Deathworlders had never truly understood the concept of defeat. In every campaign they had waged across the stars, victory had been inevitable. They had crushed entire civilizations without breaking a sweat, leaving nothing but ruins in their wake. But Earth was different. The humans were not just defending their world. They were resisting. They weren't fighting for power, wealth, or domination. They were fighting for their home, for their survival. And as the battle escalated, the Deathworlders began to realize the horrifying truth: they might not leave Earth alive. The humans had evolved rapidly. In the early stages of the invasion, the Deathworlders had easily overwhelmed them with their superior technology. But Earth's inhabitants had an ability the conquerors couldn't anticipate. They didn't just adapt, they innovated. The humans weren't relying on raw strength or advanced weapons alone. They were using everything available to them: nature, ingenuity, and their unbreakable will to fight back. And now, the Deathworlders were seeing the results of that relentless creativity. It was in the very air they breathed, in the weapons they faced, in the traps they stumbled into. They had underestimated the humans, and Earth itself, by thinking they could simply march in, overpower them, and claim victory. But now, they were on the back foot. And as they looked around, they realized the humans weren't just fighting with weapons. They were fighting with everything they had. One night, as the Deathworlders set up camp near the ruins of a human city, a series of strange, unsettling noises echoed through the jungle surrounding them. It started as a soft rustle, like the wind moving through the trees, but then it grew louder, more deliberate. The Deathworlders, already on edge from the constant attacks, readied their weapons, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Out of the shadows emerged a small group of humans, no more than a dozen, But they didn't look like the same fighters the Deathworlders had faced before. These humans weren't armed with guns or knives. They carried nothing but a single burning torch. The Deathworlders didn't know what to make of it. They had seen humans retreat, fight back with whatever they could scavenge, but this was something else entirely. As the humans approached, they moved with a strange, almost ritualistic precision. They didn't show fear. They didn't even look at the Deathworlders. Their eyes were locked on something else, something that sent an unsettling chill down the spines of the conquerors. Without warning, the humans raised their torches high, casting flickering shadows over the ground. In that instant, the Deathworlders felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sudden, overwhelming pressure in the air. And then, the ground beneath them started to tremble. Before they could react, the forest around them erupted into flame. It wasn't just fire. It was an inferno that spread faster than the Deathworlders could respond. A fire that seemed to have a life of its own. The trees, the underbrush, even the very soil seemed to be consumed in an instant. It was as if the earth itself had turned against them. But it wasn't just the fire that was terrifying. It was the coordination. The humans, with nothing but torches and their collective will, had unleashed a controlled wildfire that rapidly consumed the area around the Deathworlders' camp. The conquerors tried to fight the flames with their technology, but their advanced weapons were useless in the face of Earth's raw, untamed power. The flames danced, unpredictable and alive, spreading in every direction, fueled by the wind and the very landscape itself. The Deathworlders were trapped. They could hear the humans chanting something in unison, their voices rising above the crackling fire, but they didn't understand the words. The humans weren't just trying to destroy them. They were trying to make a point. The Earth was not just a battlefield. It was a force in itself, a living entity that would protect its inhabitants by any means necessary. And now, the Deathworlders were in the middle of it. The fire pushed them back, forcing them to retreat further into the jungle. But the fire didn't stop. It followed them. The flames rose higher and higher, crackling through the trees, scorching everything in their path. It was as if the planet itself was rising to meet the humans' cries, responding to their will with a fury the Deathworlders had never seen. The flames grew hotter. The heat became unbearable. The Deathworlders tried to shield themselves, but the fire was too much. The landscape around them, once a silent, peaceful jungle, had turned into a nightmare, a fiery hellscape where every step was an ordeal, every movement was met with heat and smoke. As the conquerors staggered back, overwhelmed by the flames, they realized the fire wasn't just about the flames themselves. It was a message. It was the planet fighting back in a way that only Earth could. The humans were not just standing their ground. They were using the very forces of nature to turn the tide of battle in their favor. The Deathworlders had no answer to this. They were being beaten, not by weapons, not by numbers, but by the planet itself, and by a species whose creativity and adaptability had taken them to places the conquerors couldn't even fathom. The Deathworlders had never considered that something as simple as fire could be their undoing, but now, it was clear, they had underestimated the strength of Earth's ecosystem, and more importantly, the strength of humanity's will to protect it. As the last of the flames flickered out, the Deathworlders were left to survey the destruction. Their equipment had been destroyed, their camps burned to the ground, and several of their soldiers lay incapacitated by the heat. They were no longer just fighting humans. They were fighting a world that had come to life against them. But even in the face of this terrifying realization, the Deathworlders refused to give up. They would not bow to a world they considered inferior. Earth had its defenders, but the conquerors still believed they were unstoppable. And they had one final strategy, a last attempt to reclaim their victory, to show the humans and the planet that they would never be defeated. They had learned one thing, however. Earth was not going down without a fight. The humans were not just defending their world. They were changing it, shaping it into a weapon far stronger than anything the Deathworlders had ever encountered. And the planet, with all its natural fury, was not simply going to let these invaders win. As the Deathworlders regrouped and began planning their next move, they realized that Earth's battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The Deathworlders were reeling. They had been caught off guard by Earth's fiery wrath, their forces decimated by an unforgiving landscape and a species whose resilience was beyond anything they had imagined. But even in the midst of chaos, even with their advanced technology failing them and the Earth itself turning against them, the conquerors had only one thing on their minds: survival. They had never been defeated before, and they weren't about to let it happen now, not when they were so close to victory. But something had changed. They could feel it in the air, in the tense stillness of the jungle, as the aftermath of the fire smoldered around them. The humans, no longer just passive victims, were starting to adapt to the invasion in ways that even the Deathworlders couldn't foresee. They had become something else entirely. They were no longer simply defending their world. They were fighting to reclaim it, and the conquerors were beginning to realize that Earth was not a prize they could take. It was a home the humans would die to protect. The Deathworlders gathered in what remained of their camp, regrouping in the remnants of the jungle. Their armor was scorched, their ships were in disrepair, and their numbers had dwindled. The once indomitable conquerors were now wounded, unsure of how to proceed. Every step they took forward only led them deeper into Earth's untamed wilderness, where the humans were waiting, ready to strike. But then something even more dangerous appeared: a new tactic. The humans had always been resourceful, but they were now showing something far more troubling: a sense of unity, a collective intelligence. It was as if they were no longer just individual soldiers fighting for survival. They were a singular force, coordinating their efforts with precision, utilizing the planet's natural resources with ruthless efficiency. The conquerors had expected to face disorganized resistance. Humanity was primitive, after all. But what they were encountering was something far more terrifying: a civilization in the process of becoming a warrior species. In one of the larger human settlements they had stumbled upon, the Deathworlders had tried to strike swiftly and decisively. Their ships had come down low, their weapons ready to decimate everything in their path. They expected the humans to run, to scatter in fear. Instead, they walked straight into an ambush. The humans had set traps in the forest, hidden among the underbrush. They knew the terrain better than any invader ever could. And in the heart of the jungle, a series of explosions ripped through the ground, sending the Deathworlders flying. The conquerors, with their superior armor and weaponry, tried to retaliate, but they were now forced to play defense. Every path they took was fraught with danger, every move they made countered by the humans' knowledge of their own world. They were trapped, and for the first time in their long existence, they felt the unsettling sensation of being hunted. The humans were no longer just surviving. They were outsmarting them at every turn. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about a deep connection with the land, a symbiosis with the environment that allowed them to use Earth's very ecosystem as a weapon. The Deathworlders couldn't fight something they didn't understand. They were used to enemies they could overpower, not an opponent that could make the planet itself rise against them. As the days stretched on, the Deathworlders found themselves in a deadlock. They couldn't move forward without risking complete destruction, and they couldn't retreat without risking complete annihilation. The jungle had turned against them, the earth trembled beneath their feet, and the sky seemed to close in on them. It was a world unlike any they had ever encountered, a world that wasn't just resisting but fighting back. But the Deathworlders didn't give up. They were survivors too. They had conquered too many worlds to let this one be the end. So they adapted. They began to learn from the humans. They had no choice. Their once thought invincible technology now seemed archaic compared to the tactics the humans employed. The conquerors had learned one thing: Earth's strength was in its diversity. It was in the human ability to adapt to any circumstance, to survive through ingenuity and resilience, no matter how overwhelming the odds. But the Deathworlders were not ready to give up their dominance so easily. They began to learn the ways of Earth, too, though in their own twisted way. They analyzed the planet's systems, its weather patterns, its wildlife, and began using the same brutal tactics they had used to conquer every other world. They began to weaponize Earth's own elements against the humans. As they dug deeper into the planet's geology, they discovered massive underground caverns, veins of mineral-rich ore that they could use to create weapons more powerful than anything the humans had ever encountered. They found ways to control the environment, manipulating the planet's natural resources for their own gain. They even began planting devices that could artificially trigger seismic events, shaking the Earth in a way that could send the humans running, scattering like ants. But this was no longer a one-sided fight. The humans had already adapted to Earth's unpredictable shifts in the landscape, and they too had learned the Earth's secrets. As the Deathworlders set their traps, the humans disarmed them with astonishing precision. The humans had mastered not just their technology, but also their environment, a weapon in its own right. The battle had become a war of wits, a test of which species could adapt faster, who could outthink the other in a war where every inch of Earth was a potential battleground. The Deathworlders, with their vast armies and devastating technology, were now fighting for survival against a species that had no intention of losing their home. Then a new threat emerged. The humans had begun to organize on a level that the Deathworlders had never seen before. Resistance cells in every corner of the world were beginning to coalesce into a global network. They were no longer just fighting as individual groups. They were acting as a single entity, united in their will to protect Earth. The planet was no longer simply a resource to the humans. It was their cause, and they would defend it with every ounce of their strength. The Deathworlders, who had once seen themselves as the pinnacle of power, began to realize the true nature of the struggle. This was not just a fight for Earth. It was a battle for the soul of the planet. The humans had proven time and time again that they were not just survivors. They were warriors. And Earth was not just a planet. It was a force that had awakened to defend its inhabitants. As the Deathworlders prepared for their next assault, they understood something they had never considered before. They were not invincible. Earth wasn't just a world to be conquered. It was a living, breathing force, and it had chosen its champions. The humans would not stop fighting, and Earth would not stop defending. The question now wasn't whether the Deathworlders could defeat the humans. It was whether they could survive long enough to escape Earth with their lives.